Here at Lake Grove Presbyterian Church, we recognize the complexity of this season and are inviting all of us to reflect on our experience of this complicated and uncertain time. Good morning, Lillian. It's so good to be with you today. And for all of you listening, we're so glad that you're joining along with us. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we thought, oh, what a perfect time to talk about a very important topic. And Lillian is going to expand on this for us in a moment here, but that's suicide prevention. And for those listening, we are located in Oregon. Specifically, the congregation we serve is in Lake Oswego. And this tragedy and heartache has hit our community very close through some of our high school students in this past year. And we know that over the last year and the challenges of COVID and isolation, the instances of suicide have grown. And so how much we want to reach out to be able to help with this. As a matter of fact, so much so that the staff at the church we serve, Lake Grove Presbyterian, felt it important that we would get training on suicide prevention, because each one of us can take a part in preventing it, just in the way we care for people. So Lillian, that's a little bit of an introduction for us. What else would you share with us?
Yeah, I think during our training as a staff, when we were talking about suicide prevention, just thinking about some of the national statistics, knowing that these are now old statistics. We're recording in 2021, and the data that we have is from back in 2017. But in 2017, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death. And for every death by suicide, approximately 25 attempts occurred, which to me was just, astounding. Yeah. 25 attempts occurred for every death by suicide. And one thing, as we have all been hearing on the news and watching and hearing again locally with the high schooler who died by suicide, we know that there is an increased potential risk for suicide. Unfortunately, there has been no substantial data collected as of yet, and that makes sense because the pandemic has only been a year, and to collect data takes several years. But suicide experts have agreed, there is definitely consensus that there is this perfect storm where threats would increase suicide risks. So you mentioned one of them, the isolation, so social disconnectedness, loneliness, diminished social support, fears or loss of jobs, and financial loss, the economic loss. So those are all factors that contribute to this potential rise in risk of suicide. So one thing that I think I wanted to just make sure we all heard is what you said in our introduction, that we are all able to contribute in preventing suicide. It's not just reserved for a specific group of people, but we all can play a part in reducing suicide. And the second thing that I wanted us to all remember is that is a myth buster. The myth is, it's dangerous to ask someone if they are considering suicide. So let's just not talk about it. And that is an absolute false statement. What have you heard in your circle, Susan?
Oh, well, certainly that myth is so prevalent, and it's so understandable as well, right? Some things can have such a pain attached to them, of course, that we don't even want to say the words, but then we can act actually in a destructive way by never talking about it. That just heaps shame and more hiddenness onto it. And so in our community, and our local high school actually is trying to help with this and working through a a school-wide survey and really assessment for the students where this topic is brought up. And they've done a really good job of communicating with parents to try to help assure them that this is not, because isn't this the fear that what if you put that idea in their head? And it really is found to be untrue. And what helps is being able to be direct about it, talk, ask. And maybe Lillian, you could give us some suggestions of how to do that, because it is frightening, and that is absolutely so understandable, but so important to talk about it. So I'm so glad our local school district is doing this, and that our church staff, I mean, really, that everyone is invited to be a part of this.
Right. Because death by suicide is not just by age. It's not just youth. It's not just adults. It's not just older adults. In fact, I think one of the statistics, and I could be misquoting this a little bit, but over the age of 75, men who die by suicide, that number just shoots up drastically. Mm-hmm. So it really is across the ages, a concern for all ages. Mm-hmm. And so you asked, what are possible ways that we could ask about this? Well, if someone is seriously contemplating suicide, we remember that by us asking or even using the word suicide, we're not putting the idea in their head. And so one way that was suggested that we could ask is, first off, enter into a non-judgmental conversation mm-hmm. with the person. If they are able to feel like they can open up to you, they will talk about, oh yeah, I'm having a hard time. Like things are just really rough, or I feel like I'm a real burden. It'd be better off if I weren't here. Like if my parents didn't have to take care of me, or my child didn't have to take care of me. And one way to ask is just simply, it sounds like you're having a hard time. Things are going you're having a very difficult time. It's very challenging. Are you thinking about suicide? And just use those words.
Yes.
And by using that word, there will be a reaction. Either the answer will be yes, and I've been thinking about it, or it will be a no, I'm not thinking about suicide. And just getting the person to answer that question, are you thinking about suicide, can help you then make the next step, mm-hmm. which is always, the next step is to persuade them to make a call and reach out.
Yes.
Either reach out to your primary care physician, to a mental health specialist, or to call the National Suicide Prevention Line. And I want to say it, okay, so the phone number is 1-800-273-8255. Or you could even text the word TALK, TALK, to the number 741-741. And so any of those options, calling your primary care physician or seeking out a mental health professional, or texting or calling the National Suicide Prevention Line is the next step. If you hear someone say, yes, I have contemplated suicide, you want to refer. Yes. And never leave them. Never say, oh, well, here's the phone number. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye. Don't do that. Don't leave them in a very vulnerable place where they have expressed and bared their heart out. They've said, yes, I am contemplating suicide. You want to stay with them. Maybe do a conference call and say, hey, let's call your doctor together right now. Mm-hmm. Or let's call the National Suicide Prevention Line together right now. Mm-hmm. And then once they've connected, or you've helped them connect with somebody, that's when you can say, okay, ask them permission. Are you feeling okay? Do you want me to hang around a little longer? Or is it okay for me to leave and call you in an hour to check in on you? So those are just simple tips. Ask the question. If they say yes, then persuade them to reach out to a professional, and then refer them to that professional. Was that clear enough, Susan?
Yes, I think it was very clear. Thank you. And for those numbers, for the numbers to give us both for calling and texting, I think is very helpful, because this is what I'd really want you all to hear too and know. Help is really close, and it's at the other side of that number. And so it can feel so frightening, but please reach out. And I thank you for your wisdom and guidance, and stay connected with the person, being able to stay connected. Goodness, I just really appreciate how you've been sharing with us about this, but really there's the invitation to pay attention to one another. And when we see ways that people may be hurting, to really go ahead and ask. And it may not be as serious as a question as that, right? But you can begin the conversation with a genuine, how are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even if it's over Zoom, I mean, look into their eyes and ask them, how are you? And it does come across. The fact that you care comes across. Even in your voice, if it's over the phone, how are you doing? Yeah. And as we're starting to meet in person again, the good thing is that our masks only cover our mouths and nose, but you could still see our eyes, and you can look into their eyes and say, how are you, genuinely? So yeah, that's pay attention to one another. And it does remind me of a verse in the Bible where God is renewing his covenant with his people. And so they've been wandering the desert for 40 years, and they are exhausted, and they're right at the cusp of entering into the promised land. It's like, yay, like relief. We can almost like feel and taste the relief and the abundance of the promised land. And God asks for his people to gather. And he says in Deuteronomy 30, and I'm going to get my Bible, Deuteronomy 30 in verse 19 says, choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him. For that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land that the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so to all of you who are listening, if you are feeling like this past year has just brought you up to a point where you feel hopeless, and maybe you have considered suicide, then please reach out either to the National Suicide Prevention Line, or send a text. Hope is so close to you, just a phone call away. And if you know someone who has contemplated suicide or who is going through a difficult time and you're just not sure, then please reach out to them. Like, press stop on this, whatever you're listening to. If you're listening to this on YouTube or podcast or on our church website, press stop and call your friend or family member. And our prayer for all of you is that you would choose life, the life that the Lord our God has promised us in the promised land.
Amen. Thank you, Lillian. And thank you all for joining us. Blessing to you this day.